Our first guest is Harriet Rimell. Harriet, you were a housewife at the time in 1962, pregnant if I'm remembering correctly, right?
You're right, pregnant, yes.
So you were living where in the St. Louis area?
I was living in University City.
Did you already have kids or were you pregnant with your first child?
No, I was pregnant with my third child.
So you had kids who were already in school or of school age?
Yes, that's correct. My daughter was in school, but there was 5 years difference between her and the next child, so he was just an infant. And the third child was not born yet.
Harriet, they're asking me to hold your microphone just a little bit closer to your mouth. Thanks very much. So, do you remember Kennedy speaking to the nation?
I definitely remember that.
I mean, were you watching the lovely black and white TV?
I wouldn't take my eyes off of it. It was petrifying, actually, when you thought about it. We saw pictures from what had happened to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and yet we still had no idea of the really terrible effects of radiation. The country, I think, was not very educated about it. So we thought we could be safe in basements, and so I spent a lot of time accumulating canned goods and taking them down to the basement that wasn't even a full basement. Part of it was above level.
It's great that you would. They're asking me to switch it angle it that way for you as I touch you there for a minute, Harriet. It's fascinating that you should mention. We have some B-roll footage of fallout shelters we're going to show a little bit later in the program. Some nice stacks of canned goods on the walls and the whole shebang. And so you were just doing your part, right? That's what America was supposed to do. Be prepared.
That's what I was trying
That's civil
to
defense.
do. Right. And my husband made big jokes about it and said, "Be sure and take your hair dye. Don't forget your hair dye." But I was very concerned. It bothered me a lot. So. And
did you have friends? I was 5 years old at the time, and my brother would have been 8 at the time, and my mom had a circle of friends, and my dad had, they had bridge club, and my mom had like a coffee club in the morning, and they did all sorts of, things with friends. Did you talk about it amongst your circle of friends in the neighborhood? Was it the big buzz? Or?
Actually, I think that people were so inured from after the Second World War that nothing could touch us, that most of my friends, as I recall, just didn't seem to be, they just went on with their lives. On the other hand, really, what could you do? There really was not much you could do. So it wasn't the kind of issue I think it might be if it happened today.
Well, let's see what questions our student groups might have for you, Harriet.
Okay.
And think in terms, as you think about your questions, what it might have been like for the housewife of the time, but other questions that cross your mind as we begin to bring in these other images and video. Let's start by going to Del Valley, Texas. Del Valley, come on in, say hi to everybody. Let's hear your question.
Our question is, do you think that people in 1962 were more worried about nuclear bombs than we are today?
Do you think people in 62 were more worried about nuclear bombs than we are today?
No, I don't. First of all, not that many countries had, as far as we knew, not that many countries had. We knew Russia had it, and we knew the United States had it. And so we weren't that concerned. Russia was quite a distance from us, and they didn't have the capabilities that they have today of intercontinental ballistic missiles. But Cuba was a big concern.
Yeah, these intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, these were actually IRBMs, intermediate range ballistic missiles, but they could go far enough. And to give you an idea about that, we've got an image we can bring up to show you that. We've got we'll go to slide number 4, which gives you a map of how far they believe that these different missiles could have traveled from Cuba. And so you'll see there, Cuba to Miami, Florida, about 234 miles. Obviously, to get to New York City was a little over 1,200 miles, but there was a sense, so to speak, of this was happening in our own backyard, and it was something totally unexpected in that regard that added to, I don't want to call it panic, but the concern?
Yes, definitely.
And we've got a great question coming from an AP history class. Thanks very much for this question that came in, because they asked specifically, do you think Kennedy's announcement that it would be considered an act of war based on the Monroe Doctrine? And so AP history students, thank you, one, for remembering what the Monroe Doctrine is about. Your history teacher is now very happy with you. And yes, obviously what we were doing at that point in time was indeed saying that, Monroe's doctrine applied in this particular instance. And we weren't going to allow that stuff into the Western Hemisphere. Good question. Let's go to our next student group. New Franklin, Missouri, a question for Harriet.
Do you feel President Kennedy's actions were the only and best available option?
Based on what you knew at the time, did you think that Kennedy's action seemed the most appropriate, the best one to do?
Yes, definitely. It wasn't like airplanes were coming over. It was ships and delivering the missiles. And I don't think he really had much choice other than to let Castro have a missile base 90 miles off our shores. So, yes, definitely.
And you mentioned the idea that they're coming by ship. We've got some images that are now declassified images from the CIA, but things that the president would have seen at the time, which shows you pictures of Soviet ships carrying missile parts. So we're going to go to image 16, and then we'll go through a couple of others as well. So here you see one Soviet ship. This is September 15th, you'll notice 1962. And on the part of the image on the bottom, you're able to see different things under cover that they considered to be fuselages of various missile parts. And then the next image, 17, that will show you, they referred to something known as cratology in the CIA. And what they were trying to do was determine what was hidden in those crates. And they made determination that the crates on those that boat there and other boats like it were either carrying parts of the weapon itself or part of the erector, the missile launching system. And then our third image here that we'll come up with next just gives you another parts of many fuselage crates. See them there, the roll of what looks like large pipes, the fuselages which would be part of missiles. This is the kind of material that Kennedy had available to him that Stevenson spoke to at the United Nations when he made his presentation to the United Nations. And we've got some B-roll footage, some video of Adeline Stevenson speaking to the United Nations now.
We now know that the Soviet Union, not content with Dr. Castro's oath of fealty, not content with the destruction of Cuban independence, not content with the extension of Soviet power into the Western Hemisphere, not content with a challenge to the inter-American system and to the United Nations Charter, has decided to transform Cuba into a base for communist aggression, into a base for putting all of the Americas under the nuclear gun.
Kids are studying history today. Think about similarities between what you see happening here with Stevenson at the United Nations and, in essence, what Colin Powell was doing when he went to the United Nations before the Iraq War. Same idea was to present information that they believed was interpreted properly about what we were being seen. And so to some extent, you've always got to believe that the interpreters are interpreting the data. Was there any kind of question at the time that the government could have been wrong, Harriet? Do you remember anything like that at all?
No, we were still very much full of patriotism from the Second World War, a patriotism that I don't believe the children today even understand. Can drives, and we took our mother's pots and pans and stole them out of the kitchen to put them in the scrap iron piles. Mm-hmm. So I think that carried over from my generation. So the patriotism was very, very, and also there was not the information coming out like you have newscasters who travel the world and come back and tell you what's happening. And you actually see the battles as they're happening. That wasn't available back then. So you pretty much agreed with the government and what was happening. So yes.
Thank you. Let's go to Spencer, Wisconsin. A question from our folks up north.
Did your kids ever ask any questions, like what was happening, like when they were in school and stuff?
My children were kind of young. My daughter was, I believe, just going into first grade. So they had no concept except for the, what was that called, the hide and whatever, when they had to get under
duck
and cover, right? the defense drills that happened. So my children were too young to understand what was going on.